Hey everybody, it is a super start to this week. I am Evan Bland along with Z Long. We're with the Omaha World-Herald, and we're here to talk NCAA baseball. And man, it was a wild and wacky regional weekend. We have some sweet super regionals set up. We are about 10 days now, a little under 2 weeks from the College World Series rolling into Omaha, man. It's an exciting time. How late did you stay up, and how many of the games did you watch this weekend?
An embarrassing amount is what I did. I mean, between watching individual games and then putting on ESPN Squeeze Play, which is probably one of the coolest things I've ever. That they just deserve a hand for that. I watched a ton of baseball. I got up and did a few exercise things in the morning. Then I settled into the couch and I kind of watched all the way through. I was almost falling asleep last night, and the fire alarm actually went off where I live at. And I think it was the baseball gods going, "You're not done. You're watching this Stanford Texas State game." But no, Evan, I mean, from an anxiety standpoint and a pressure standpoint, and maybe just having more access to these games because of those platforms on ESPN, probably one of the funnest weekends I think I've been around college baseball. It was just phenomenal drama, phenomenal swag, phenomenal energy. And if this keeps building through supers and into Omaha, we're going to have one hell of a World Series.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it was through the roof. And to your point about the squeeze play, I think it was Sunday night. I mean, there were like three key late inning moments going on simultaneously. I mean, you'd watch one screen and it was like a huge hit, and then you'd watch the next screen, it was huge strikeout, one-run games, extra inning games. I mean, college baseball was on full display for the quirky, sort of unpredictable game that it is. I mean,
Yeah.
it was really cool. I guess just in general, I mean, what sort of stood out to you? We're talking 105 games, 16 regional sites. Were there any sort of big picture, takeaways or things you noticed?
I think it's the entertainment value, Evan. It's the offense and the swag. I mean, you're just seeing so much energy around the sport right now. The offenses are through the roof. They are getting after pitchers, and the home runs they're hitting. It's not just that they're clearing a fence, they're massive. We got kids hitting bombs, standing at the plate, staring it down, bat flips, celebrations. I know there's a code to the game, and you got to be careful because you'll piss off an hombre and they'll put a fastball in your rib cage. But I think this is good for college baseball, especially after the pandemic. We lost the World Series for a year. We lost the energy. And to see these kids reacting and some of these fan bases, look at some of the stadiums full of people. The attendance was phenomenal over the weekend of regional play. So that's what stood out to me, is like that 90s, late 80s, 90s era Rosenblatt swag to college baseball with the big bats. Man, it felt like it was back this week. And I think that's what stood out to me most, was the game was fun again. And I don't care if there was 29 to 15 games. You can't tell me that that wasn't entertaining to see that type of stuff and how those teams battled their asses off to keep their season alive. It was just a great weekend.
I mean, and to your point about the venues, like you had everything from Oklahoma State, Arkansas, and a brand new park in Stillwater, all the way to Maryland, which has never hosted, had to bring in bleachers, Georgia Southern as a 16 seed. Like you had the full gambit in terms of types of venue, types of fans, veteran programs, newcomers. It was really interesting. The scoring to me absolutely stood out. I mean, Oklahoma State, Missouri State set the record for runs scored in an NCAA postseason baseball game. I spent more time than I care to admit, Z, looking up how many home runs were hit last weekend. I'm curious. I'm going to put it out there for you. 105 games in the regional round. How many home runs do you suppose were hit last weekend?
320.
Pretty close.
That's not bad.
349.
Well, I knew we were almost 200 after the first couple days. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to guess over 300. That wasn't too bad for just a blind guess. I didn't look it up, I swear to God.
Not well. I mean, as far as I know, you have to do the math, and so it's more than 3.3 home runs per game, which is a lot. It's a ton, and so I think that does speak to the strength of the hitting out there, but it also, I think, kind of speaks to the lack of pitching depth. And if you have more than 3 or 4 arms, man, this is the time of year when you're really going to shine.
And I
So
think we can hone in on teams. That's what's going to be the key. Who's got pitching staffs? Because my God, you miss a location to some of these dudes. I mean, it's a highlight reel.
yeah, no doubt. So now, wild, wacky weekend. We have the supers matchups here. We can go through some of those. What do you feel like maybe stands out when you look at this matchup of 16 teams left?
I think we'll start at the top, right, with the number one national seed, Tennessee. And I think they got better this weekend. I really did. I think they got drug into the deep waters a little bit and they got tested. Campbell, those dudes could rake. They put him after, they got after him. And then Georgia Tech, that reliever that they had, who's a dandy, comes out in a starting role and can throw 100 miles an hour, and he frustrated him. But I think the thing I learned about Tennessee, here's what I relate it to. They're a 12-round fight. That's exactly what they are. If you keep them quiet for X amount of time, the problem is you're going to have to fight them for 12 rounds. And that's what I think they got better this weekend, Evan. I really did. I mean, they got put into a pressure situation, that nasty crowd they have in Knoxville. God, that was a great environment. So them and Notre Dame, I think that's an intriguing one because Notre Dame can pitch, but of all the offensive arsenal we had this weekend, the Statesboro Regional was boring. Like, it was not as high tech. And I think I worry about with that matchup as Notre Dame is, can you swing stick for stick with Tennessee? And I think the answer is no. So I think we learned a lot about Tennessee last weekend, but I think it was like an animal that you may have wounded. You just really made them mad. And I think the animal came back even stronger. So that's what stood out to me about Tennessee was I think we learned a lot. And where last year we had a very shaky number one national seed, there's not a lot of shake to the Volunteers right now. That team is really, really scary. And you always ask the cliche question, right, Evan? Somebody's got to beat them twice. I don't see that happening this weekend with Notre Dame.
Yeah, good luck. And it wasn't just Tennessee, right? I mean, the teams that advanced largely absolutely had to earn it. I mean, Oregon State had to squeak by a really game Vanderbilt team. Louisville had to rally past Michigan, East Carolina. Like there were so many different regionals where the teams that emerged, of course, Arkansas getting past Oklahoma State, that was a war. So a lot of teams really had to prove it in that round. I thought it was interesting too, looking at sort of the breakdown of things where, you said last week, Z, you felt like it was pretty chalky in terms of your predictions, and it ended up, you have 11 national seeds, you got 2 number 2 seeds, and you have 2 3 seeds. And it kind of, as we spoke about last time, since this event has been in downtown Omaha, there's been a 3 seed that's made the field 8 out of 10 times. So you're looking at, 3rd seed Ole Miss at Southern Miss, which is really fascinating for that state in particular. And then you're looking at UConn, 3rd seeded UConn going down to Stanford. So history would say that one of those teams has a pretty good chance of making it to Omaha. That'll be pretty fascinating. And then, you look at sort of the surprise hosts. I mean, Texas State almost had a chance to host. They almost were able to knock Stanford off before the Cardinal rallied. So you really only have 2 sort of what you would call surprise regional hosts, and that's the 10 seed North Carolina. They get Arkansas to come to them. And then you have like I mentioned, at the 11 seed Southern Miss welcoming in Ole Miss, which should be really
right
too.
The villain of bracket release day, Ole Miss. They don't need to be in the tournament. They go to Coral Gables, which not shocking that Miami lost there. They do not defend that home field very well, but Ole Miss went through clean, Evan. They look good. Tim Elko was stroking the baseball, and man, inject it right into our veins. Southern Miss, Ole Miss in Hattiesburg. If you saw any of that regional against LSU this week, those atmospheres were viper pits. So yeah, and I'm jazzed either way. Whatever team wins their way into Omaha, I got that on my notes down here. That's my juice regional, because there's going to be a lot of juice in Hattiesburg of varying varieties. Right. Very intense. I'm really enthralled about that one. And, I think I looked down here too. I think I wrote down a thing called clean. Teams that got through the weekend clean, I think, are the ones you got to take note of. And Tennessee did get through clean, but they got challenged. But you look at Texas, pretty uneventful, took care of business. A&M really showed some resolve, gotten some tough times against TCU, through clean. Virginia Tech, Oklahoma, that's going to be a regional, my friends. Virginia Tech went through very clean. They've just not been messed with right now. It's going to be fascinating to watch that. Ole Miss got through clean. And then the other one, quiet, but God, they had a tough regional. Auburn just cruised. They cruised through UCLA and Florida State. So I look at those teams that got through clean. That's going to be fascinating to see if they're just a little bit more rested, pitching staff a little bit more intact, even though they do have 4 days of rest before these starts. But those teams that got through clean, I think worth watching.
You mentioned too, like Ole Miss, they were right on the bubble. They got a lot of grief for making the field. Now they're in the supers. Auburn got a lot of grief for hosting a regional, and then they make it through and look pretty dominant doing that. And then Oklahoma was a team that a lot of people thought should have hosted, that maybe the committee didn't take into account their Big 12 tournament run. And so they emerged from the Gainesville regional anyway, and now they have a shot at Virginia Tech. So it was interesting because a lot of the teams that were sort of in controversial positions heading into the postseason kind of went ahead and proved on the field that they deserved, what they were getting. So last one for you, Z. We kind of did our Omaha 8 before the tournament. Now we have a bunch of extra data points to look at with the regionals. Who in your mind has taken their stock up a notch as we get closer to the College World Series, and whose stock among those who are still alive maybe has decreased a little bit?
Well, I'm doing okay here. I'm still at 6 of 8. I lost 2 of my original picks. Miami, which I don't know why I bought on them, but I wanted to because of their swag factor. And then Oklahoma State, that was just a risk, and they were this close to winning. I wish those 2 teams weren't in the same regional, because Arkansas and Oklahoma State both deserve to be playing this weekend. So yeah. I lost 2, so I'm doing okay. But in terms of my stock up, it's a team I mentioned a while ago. When I really look at it, it's Auburn. They are one of the most curious teams to me right now, and they get a tough draw just from a flight time, right? UConn and Auburn get the frequent flyer miles this week with Corvallis and Palo Alto, but I think Auburn, Oregon State's a fascinating series, and Auburn just went through clean. In terms of the characters, right? We got so many good characters in this tournament. How can you not like Sonny D from Auburn? The dude just strokes. Like, I think he's on like 17 of 20 times he got on base this week, either via base hit or home run, and he's just a larger than life character. So, I'll take that first game up there. Let's watch that one, man. The lefty from Oregon. I'm going to butcher his name, Jerpy. The arm angle is unreal. The kid is really, really good. So watch that. But my stock's up on Auburn, man. I will not be shocked at all if they go into Corvallis the way Oregon kind of had the battle this weekend. Wouldn't be surprised at all if Auburn's not right back here. Butch Thompson has done a hell of a job at Auburn. And, they were here a few years ago. Wouldn't be surprised at all if they're back again.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think I kind of resonate what you're talking about earlier with the teams that made it through clean, like Virginia Tech. Oklahoma is really fascinating to me because a 4 national seed is pretty high to begin with, but as clean as they played and then as hot as Oklahoma is coming in, that's a really fascinating one. Yep. It's hard to discount Virginia Tech though, man. They can beat you in so many different ways. So that's one, I think. And then you kind of have the UConn Stanford one is fascinating just because UConn has so much momentum coming out of that thing after so many regional appearances, and Stanford kind of looks mortal, right? After what they went through against Texas State. So that one feels closer now than I think it would have been if you would have said a week ago that particular matchup was going to be there. And then Texas, East Carolina is really interesting too, as an 8-9 game. Texas, as you said, they really went through without much issue. They got to go on the road to East Carolina, which has been a tough place to play there. And I don't know, that feels like more of a toss-up to me, I think, even than it did a week ago.
It's not our job to feel bad for people, but damn it, Cliff Godwin and East Carolina have been knocking on the door, and we kept asking ourselves, is this you're going to do it? And they got into a tussle with Coastal Carolina, which was one of your dark horse picks, and that one's almost came through. For me, that series comes down to East Carolina has to make it messy. They really do, because if Texas has a fault, it's their depth on their pitching staff. I mean, game 1, Pete Hansen is a gamer. You're going to have a problem with Pete Hansen, but my God, does that ballpark play small? I don't know what Ivan Melendez might do in that park this weekend for Texas, but highlight real home runs. But for East Carolina, you got to make that game dirty. Steal one of those first 2, force that game 3, because then Texas pitching staff becomes a lot more pedestrian than it is with, say, a Pete Hansen on the mound. But I'm like you. That one is a fascinating series, and you're sitting there pulling for East Carolina because they just haven't got here before. But damn, they've got a tough draw. That Texas team looked Omaha caliber this week. That's what they look like. And so I'm like you. That one I'm going to be eyes on a lot.
And the challenge is different for the super regional round too, because in the regional, man, we saw how everybody's pitching depth was tested. When you're playing 4 games, 5 games in a condensed period, you're putting guys out there who are not used to being in those spots. Now you've got a super regional format where it's a weekend series, essentially. You take 2 or 3
Right.
for the teams that have those upper echelon arms. If you have an ace that acts like an ace, that's a lot more valuable this weekend than it would even be during a regional weekend.
Right. You know, you look at a couple teams, if I had to pick 2, you got to go, man, their pitching staff, that dog will hunt. I mean, Southern Miss, right? Phenomenal pitching. They've got really good starters, one of the lowest ERAs in the country. Love their closer that came in last night and closed out that LSU game. 6'8" kid, really got after him. You know, they've got a great pitching staff. And then Tennessee, hate to say it, but when you got 4 first-round arms, or future possibly draft pick arms in that 4 rotation, Evan Joyce doesn't even pitch this weekend. They never even needed him. You know, those are 2 teams that obviously have the pitching staffs to cause a problem. Notre Dame's got a good one pitcher, but no more depth past that. So yeah, I definitely would look at Southern Miss and Tennessee just because they have the arms to kind of limit some of the anarchy that we've seen on the home run front.
Yeah, and the standard is going to be high for this super regional weekend because of how just consistently excellent all these regional posts were. So we'll see how that goes, and then we have the College World Series, of course, starts June 17th and can go potentially through June 27th if things go the distance there. So we're getting closer. We're inching closer to Omaha. It's going to be a ton of fun. I'm sure we'll be back next week to break down the field of 8 as it stands. But man, it's been great to this point. I hope everyone enjoys another weekend of super regional baseball. And then if you're around locally, you'll have a chance to go out and see some of these teams yourself. So for Z Long, I'm Evan Bland. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the baseball.